Hi everyone, it is Sabra from Hoof and Footfalls, and on this live adaptive therapeutic riding instructor chat, we're going to be talking about the type of trot I use to introduce the trot to my students, and also how this is a complete 180 from how I used to teach the trot when I first started teaching way back when. With that, doing a 180 in my methods and all of that, I will be sharing some of that trial and error and all those been there, done that mistakes of how I came to my current method of trotting. Those of you that are joining in live, you guys are welcome to post questions in the comments area. If you guys are watching or listening on a replay on YouTube or Facebook or any of the podcast channels, you can also drop questions in the comments. And if you tag me at Hoof and Footfalls, then it will likely let me know if you guys have a question and have commented on here, and I'm more likely to see those questions. So, before we jump into the topic, a little bit about me if you're kind of newer to my page, because there's been a lot of growth recently on YouTube and the podcast and Facebook. My name is Sabra Popoli. I am the owner and founder of Hoof and Footfalls, and I am a certified adaptive or therapeutic horseback riding instructor here in the United States. I'm certified through PATH International and CHA. Through PATH International, I'm an advanced therapeutic riding instructor. Was also faculty for the CTRI certification process way, also equine specialist in mental health and learning, and I've mentored instructors for well over a decade, and that is my passion and how Hoof and Footfalls came about. I'm also certified through CHA, instructor of riders with disabilities, and I'm a master level instructor through CHA and also a certifier for the IRD process. I've been teaching for over 15 years now, and I can definitely say that how my teaching, how I introduce topics has changed as I have just experienced more horses, more students, more disabilities, and just had more time out there in the arena. So, constantly learning and growing as an instructor is a very important thing. Why I created Hoof and Footfalls was to hopefully get information out there to instructors in this wonderful, technology information age to help you guys learn and grow and hopefully avoid some common pitfalls and mistakes that a lot of us instructors have made out there. And just so you guys know, what I say is not the only way out there. It's not the only rule. However, I try to give you guys the what's, the how's, the why's, so that you guys can make an educated decision on best practices that you are implementing out in the arena in your lessons. And I fully encourage you guys to go check what I say against the text that's out there. Fair warning, there's not much out there on adaptive or therapeutic riding, so we have to go back to the foundational traditional riding methods and what's out there on that. That's what adaptive and therapeutic riding should be based on, is traditional riding skills, okay? I see a few of you have jumped on live. So hi, Melanie. And if you guys have questions during this live chat, you guys can pop them in the comments, and then I'll do some Q&A at the end. Okay. So I currently teach traditional lessons and also adaptive or therapeutic lessons and kind of all that crossover in between. So this method that I use is actually what I use kind of across the board for most of my students, and we'll talk about what type of trot I teach first, how I got to that, and then also the kind of the exceptions to the rules of when maybe I don't use that and when I might use a different type of trot. So starting off with the old way, I used to teach the progression of trotting by introducing sitting trot first, then posting, then 2-point. And don't tune me out because I said 2-point trot. Those of you that might teach Western, this information is helpful for instructors across the board, no matter what type of seat you are teaching. This is really good for those of us that teach beginner riders, and especially those that teach students with different abilities, physical, cognitive, and emotional, okay? So I used to teach sitting trot, and then we would progress into posting and 2-point. And I would also start students with holding the reins in their hands. So that's kind of how I got my start teaching that trot. But the common problems I would consistently run into is that unless I was super lucky to have a really, really smooth horse, the students would tense up, they would brace up, they would start to bounce, and that would, of course, be worse the bouncier that the horse was, right? So that was a common problem that I would face. And a lot of times, especially when working with my students that have sensory processing disorder, either that was too much feedback for that student and it was just too much information, and then they couldn't feel the different movement of the horse, the timing, and so we had a really hard time learning how to organize the body and establish balance and seat in that sitting trot. And so it kind of felt like it was this perpetual downward spiral of they would bounce, we would get tense, the horse would speed up, we'd have to walk, and we'd only get a few steps of that trot in before we would have to kind of abandon ship because the rider was off balance, they were tense, or they were way too distracted because the bouncing was just too much input, and then we were, laughing and giggling too much, which having fun is good, but to a limit. And then, or I would abandon ship because I felt bad for my horse's back because the students were bouncing all over. I would also find a lot that when I introduced that sitting trot first, that tendency when the students kind of grip and get tight is to grip with that lower leg versus the seat and the upper thigh and that whole seat that we ride with. And then we'd go into that horse speeding up, or some of the horses, they'd feel that rider go off balance and then they would break down into a walk because that's kind of their job as a good old lesson horse. And the sitting trot was okay, like I'd mentioned before, if I had the luck of getting a student on a super smooth horse, but that wasn't always what I had available. So then my first little evolution of teaching the trot was I shifted to teaching posting, then sitting, then 2-point. And those of you that are on live now or watching on a replay, if you can drop in a comment in the comments what type of trot, so sitting, posting, 2-point, what do you guys teach first to your students, traditional and adaptive? And also, is this type of trot the type that you have always used, or have you kind of gone through a evolution of this teaching, or of how you teach this skill as well, just like I have, okay? So let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. Always interesting there. So first evolution as an instructor went to then teaching posting, then sitting trot, then 2-point trot, because as I thought about riding more, because I had kind of ridden for as long as I could remember, learning how to trot, I don't really remember that because I've just been doing it. But the more students I taught, more disabilities I saw, more horses I had to work with in a lesson program, the more I saw that sitting the trot was more difficult than posting, and I wanted to try to save my horses' backs. So that's why I flopped and went to teaching that posting first. And then once we kind of got that motion down, if my students ever got that down, because that was another roadblock here in this kind of mid-evolution of how I teach the posting trot, was I just had students that they could not figure out that posting trot, or they were scared to get up into the post and they were locked up, or they were landing so hard up and down out of that posting trot and didn't have the balance and the coordination to do it that we had to abandon ship. And then I was stuck and I was like, okay, well, can't sit the trot because it's too bouncy and we're still having the bouncing problem. Posting's not working and we're only getting a few steps. So I honestly probably had my students walk for way longer than what they should have because of the constant roadblocks and struggles that I was facing at the trot. So when I had that kind of mid-level evolution of trying to teach posting first, the problems I encountered were that the students were sitting hard, like I mentioned, couldn't find the rhythm, because that's really hard to find for some of our students. Some of them pick it up and it's not a problem. Those are the easy ones to teach, not always the ones that we get. And then I had the students that were just scared of that motion and that they were stuck in the down, or I had students that it was so much information of feeling the motion of the horse under them, moving through space, and then also having to move their body up and down, that it was just too much for their brains to process, especially in adaptive or therapeutic riding. but this also happens in traditional riding, especially when you're teaching the younger kiddos where they're still learning how to process all the information and learning how to coordinate their body and all of that. So all this time, through the whole beginning process of trying sitting, posting 2-point, then I tried posting, sitting 2-point. The whole time I was drilling my students on getting a really solid position at 2-point at the walk. And we'd go up in 2-point at the walk, build balance, get good leg position under them, find that balance point, do airplane arms, really work on upper body and confidence and opening that chest. That I realized that, well, why am I not carrying this over into my trot work? Why is 2-point trot all the way at the end when at the walk it's such a beneficial activity? And one of the whys I give my students about the 2-point at the walk is we're getting up off of that horse's back and we can move a little better with them when things maybe get bouncier. We're going over obstacles. Well, what is the trot? It's more bouncy, right? So, that was kind of like a light bulb moment. Honestly, it was so long ago, I might have had a mentor or a fellow instructor like mention it, and it was that light bulb moment. So if you were that person, thank you. I appreciate it. But I just remember it was all of a sudden like smack in the face, like, oh my gosh, why have I not tried 2-point trot first? And establishing that balance and confidence and position at the trot first before we try to do posting, which is a much more complicated movement. We're having to feel the horse, deal with the movement, also be brave enough and confident enough to move up out of that saddle. And then also, what do I do then if I have a horse that's too bouncy to sit? I'm kind of stuck there. And do I then kind of make my horse suck it up and let the students bounce all over them, which ethically I didn't feel right about that. So what do I do? So then enter the era of 2-point trot first, posting second, sitting trot last, because unless you're on a super smooth horse, a well done sitting trot takes a lot of strength and coordination and balance. I would even in some cases argue more so than posting trot. So that's kind of how that has happened. So now I teach 2-point trot first, posting trot second, and then we'll go to sitting trot. I'll talk about kind of the outliers of like when I might do sitting trot first or when I might do 2-point then sitting then posting. But for a huge majority of my students now, we do 2-point first. And my prerequisites of that is that we do still hugely work on 2-point at the walk. And before we enter into trot work, we need to be able to do 2-point for at least a few steps and maintain a good balance position with airplane arms out or at least hands off of the horse. I'll even compromise hands on hips. That's usually a bit more difficult and lose position a bit more than arms out. But that is something that I do require of my students before we enter into the trot. And again, we'll talk about the outliers where we can't get to that because that happens in adaptive riding. And again, that's been a whole change in my theory and all of that there. So the 2-point at the trot, why I do that first is I have found that it is easier on your horse's backs. It is also, if done correctly, easier on your students' backs and bodies, and it's more joint friendly. It teaches your students kind of right away to establish those soft giving hips and knees and ankles that move with the horse instead of bracing up against the horse. And that is usually one of the number one struggles I hear from instructors, and also that I've encountered when I teach that posting trot first, is the student is just so stiff that they don't know how to move and loosen the knees and the hips and the ankles. Even though we do tons of stuff at the walk, it just doesn't translate to the trot. So I found that starting with the 2-point trot first helps that student learn to feel that motion, learn to go with the motion, and organize their body on top of a horse that's just moving under them, allowing that student to learn from them and learn that movement, okay? And I'm going to look here at comments at the end and read those off. Thank you guys for dropping information and comments and what you guys currently have, and what your theory is on teaching and all of that. And let me know too if you're like, oh yeah, I've run into the same problem, or I used to have that problem, but now I don't because I do this method. Love to hear from you guys as well. So, easier on the backs teaches softer joints. And then also with the 2-point at the trot, like I kind of mentioned before, I have found that it is less information for that student to sort out in their body and in their mind, and it doesn't take up so much of their attention and focus, which we only have a limited amount of. So instead of trying to throw it all at them with a sitting trot or a posting trot, and potentially have that be more information that they have to sort out, 2-point trot tends to take up less brain processing. Yes, it can be more physically demanding, but it helps organize the body in a more balanced way, with, I have found, less negative impacts on the rider and on the horse. Because if 2-point is done well, and especially established at the trot, at the walk first, then we go to the trot, leg position tends to be better, and students tend to remain a bit more confident and open in that 2-point. And yes, we have to, watch them not tipping forward. We have to watch legs not swinging back. But usually I find that the body position and leg position overall comes more naturally and more easily, even when our riders get tense and they want to do that fetal position, which is totally natural and ingrained into our brains for that self-protection mechanism. I find that they tend to stay a bit more open at the 2-point versus a sitting or a posting trot. So that is really what I work on. And also, I had mentioned before that I used to start my riders with reins in their hands. I don't. You earn reins at the trot just like you earn reins at the walk. And I do a lot of establishing body position. And before you earn your reins, depending on the rider, but for the majority of them, you need to 2-point, post. Sitting trot is negotiable because I've got big moving horses that are difficult to sit on. But 2-point and posting trot, several laps, either with a leader or on a lunge line. I lunge because I only teach privates and semi-private lessons now, for this reason, so I can progress my students better. But keep them on the lunge line, and they've got to be able to do arms out, arms in front, hands on hips, alternating arms, reaching out, kind of like karate chop, punching arms, because those are showing me that this student can process all of that information coming from the horse, coming from their environment around them, and that they can separate their hands, which are going to be on the reins, separate from their body that is doing 2-point or posting or sitting trot or whatever they're going to do, before I go turn them loose out in the arena and they start learning how to trot down the rail on their own. Then, learning how to steer and trot on their own, because we're layering in all these things. It's not just, oh, go trot by yourself. That's a whole jumble of skills that are all piled together and just trotting by yourself. Anyways, that's a whole rabbit trail there. So that has been my evolution as an instructor. And for the majority of my riders, I teach 2-point trot first, and we get that solid. And what's really neat too is that with that, I can establish a lot more confidence and balance and position in that rider faster, because I can link it back to the walk and be like, look, we've done this at the walk. I'll tell you why in a second, why I don't do posting at the trot or at the walk much anymore. That's something I used to do, don't do it much anymore. But I can link it to the walk. I have a baseline there that we can build off of. And it's also, I can correct things a little bit more easier while we are in a bit more static of a position. Yes, we're moving through space, we're moving with the horse at a 2-point. Then I have, while that student is posting, when we're then running through, moving with the horse, going up and down out of that saddle. I've also found too, for the students that tend to get kind of locked and frozen in place, starting with a 2-point first, and holding that and then learning how to touch down and then come back up, it can be a lot less unsettling than trying to go from a sitting trot and lifting yourself up out of that saddle. Or yes, okay, they're not lifting and pushing, but moving with that horse out of that saddle, getting up out of that saddle is that unsettling feeling, because we're now taking a point of contact off and we're moving through space, okay? So those are my huge whys of why I teach 2 point first, then posting, then sitting, and then also why I don't have reins on anymore. And I really make those students earn the reins back. And it's a huge thing that we do. I can tell you safety has gone up a lot since I have switched to this method and progression. Also, progression overall of my students has drastically increased, and I'm not having to go back and fix a lot of problems. I see steady progression in all of my students, traditional and adaptive, when I follow this method for the students that this works for, which, like I said, is a majority of my students. Some of the prerequisites, hard word there, that I mentioned was 2 point at the walk, and not just holding 2 point, but like a dynamic 2 point. So arms out, reaching forward, hands on hips, counting out loud, getting that breathing and that loosening up is huge. And instead of posting at the walk on the horse, because I find that if we do that, it actually, the students then learn how to like tippy toe and shove themselves out of the saddle when we actually move to a trot. I found it's kind of sets my students back more when I do posting at the walk. I have them do a activity which is posting from the knees at the ground. So they kneel down on the ground and we sit back on our heels, and then we post up through our knees and our hips, and that's a wonderful way to teach them how to open and close those hips. That I don't have a video yet of that, but I will put that in the comments. There is, I believe it's the Rider Mechanic. She's got some videos of that, of how to do that, and it's a like a centered riding. It's a Mary Wainless type theory and practice that is really, really helpful, and it's something that your students can do at home as homework that can help them become better at the posting trot, and it teaches them more correct body mechanics when it comes to posting trot than trying to attempt the posting at a walk, which I find just kind of sets them back and creates some bad habits and positions that I don't want to retrain anymore. And I've learned a better way, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Posting at the walk I will use for some students if they just physically cannot ride the trot, or they don't want to trot, and we're maybe trying to do some strengthening, some timing, staying with another student who they might ride with that's also doing a posting trot, and I want to keep it kind of similar, but I use it very sparingly, and I know the drawbacks of it now, the more that I've done it and the more I've made the mistakes in the past. So for the students where 2 point trot is not a good fit for them, so say students who cannot even do 2 point at a walk, then we would be looking into making sure that they're matched with a horse that has an extremely smooth trot to minimize the bouncing. I will no longer compromise the well-being of my horses' backs for that momentary time of letting my students just get to kind of bounce around and trot on the horse. I ethically can't do it anymore. And now that we have more studies out showing the multiplication factor of like how much force is multiplied when we are trotting and cantering on horses, it's just kind of backed up that gut feeling of like, oh, I want to do it because the student enjoys trotting, but I'm seeing my horse brace their back. I'm seeing their faces get tense, and there's resistance or they're speeding up. So it's just something that I really don't do anymore unless I have the right horse with a smooth trot. Or for a lot of my students now, I will do a fast walk or a working walk, and I can almost get more motion out of that walk that's less bouncy, but more challenging to the core than we could at a sitting trot, and I'm saving my horses back. So that has been a drastic change in how I teach the trot to those students who maybe can't do 2 point or can't do posting at this time or ever. And yes, I do have some students that they're at this time they can trot, but we might actually exit out of the trotting phase and we will only be walking, because again, we have to prioritize equine well-being and welfare and their comfort And we can't sacrifice backs just to make students happy and let them bounce and bobble around, even if they're only 30 pounds or even if whatever it is. That's been a hard shift for me as an instructor, and I know it's hard to balance, but something that I strongly believe in and also put into practice out in my program so it can be done. All right, so if you guys are listening live, thank you. Drop in the comments what type of trot that you currently teach. Is that the type that you've always taught, or have you had a change? And then I'm also going to read a few of the comments here to see what you guys say, and I'm here for a few minutes for question and answer as well. So let's see. Jennifer said, interesting logically. I'm now wondering if it's easier to learn posting from 2-point position than from sitting. It is. I'll tell you from experience, it is. And this is teaching a wide range of students with different disabilities. I can tell you with the students that, especially like autism spectrum or sensory processing disorder, where they are struggling with posting and you're like, I've tried everything in the world to try to get this rider to like understand how to post. And they just either can't get the rhythm, or they're frozen, or they kind of get it, but then they're like flopping down on the saddle because, again, can't get the rhythm. Getting them up in that 2-point, and it could be 1 or 2 lessons and it clicks. It could be months of lessons. But having them feel that motion and then count with that rhythm, or even hum with the rhythm, whatever they cognitively and verbally can do, is amazing. And that's actually the verbalization piece I've amped up a whole lot more recently, thanks to my son's piano teacher, because he reinforces so much the importance of verbalizing when you practice a physical skill as much as you can, because it helps get it better linked into your brain. So for the posting, we'll call out bump, 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 or I'm sorry, the 2-point, the rhythm. We'll call out bump, 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 or now, 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 or step, 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 whatever you want to do. And that has been like a huge game changer. And then I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll have a student where they're doing good with posting, and then all of a sudden, like, legs are out of sorts, or we're having trouble with rhythm again, or confidence is now taken a step back for whatever reason. I go back to that 2-point trot and we sort stuff out. So, for example, had a student, she had a huge growth spurt, like couple inches. We've had to, lengthen stirrups and all that. That's a little hint to me of, had to lengthen stirrups. I'm probably going to see that student struggle now with some of their more involved skills, like posting the trot. She's having to totally relearn her body because her center of gravity has changed, her length of leg has changed. She magically now can cue the horse easier. And we've had to go back to 2-point trot to reestablish and reorganize her body and that feeling, so that then we can go back to the posting, because what we're running into is her losing balance and position, and having leg issues gripping now that she has new long legs at the post. And we went back and we're solidifying now at the 2-point trot, and also doing some stuff with the Mighty Bucky as well. So Jen said, wonder if it's easier from 2-point from sitting. Yes, it is for most students. Resisting gravity to touch the saddles with the seat and then back up and forward, rather than having to lift and press from sitting. Yeah, and what's kind of nice is when you start with the 2-point and then have them start kind of that quasi-posting motion, if you're already in the up and you sit, you're teaching them to relax now, instead of having to somewhat tense more and turn on more muscles to go with that up, especially if they're locked into the saddle. So it's a bit more of a relaxed introduction to that posting motion. I've got a Mighty Bucky, so we practice that up and down motion with it moving first, and also the 2-point on the Mighty Bucky moving with some crazy motion first before we even go onto the horse. And that has been an absolute game changer for that. But before I had that, I noticed a huge jump in my students' ability and how quickly they picked it up, the posting trot, when I led with 2-point and then posting. And then sitting, because I have horses that don't have the smoothest motion, that sitting trot, we can, start with a sitting trot, but our abandoned ship, if anything happens, is we'll go up into that more light seat 2-point to get up off the back if we start bobbling around and lose our position. So that 2-point trot is also kind of a safety default of if you start bobbling and you're just losing yourself out of sorts, go back into 2-point. And that can really help riders too when stuff gets unorganized, stuff gets bumpy, all of that. You do absolutely have to make sure that you have good hands and good upper body though. So let's see, Melanie said she currently has a student on autism spectrum who's struggling with posting. Try it. Try this 2-point first and see if it really helps your student. Spend time also, like I said, having them verbalize that the rhythm, because it could just be so much information coming into them as they're trying to learn the posting that it's just too much for their brains to unpack at that time and then try to organize their body with all that stuff that's going on. So try it. Also try the kneeling on the ground and having them post from the kneeling position and then back onto their own heels and up. It's a good homework activity. Like I mentioned, I'll post that link to the video. It's a good video. Jennifer said, for small normal tone riders, I teach sitting trot first. For adult CP students, I teach 2-point first. So try it with all your students. Yeah, there was a few students where I would try the 2-point first and it would go really smooth and like didn't even click, like, oh wow, I should probably try this with all of my students first if I can. And I, like I said, I wish I would have done it years ago, but here you go. You guys can learn from all my oopsies. All right. Any other questions or comments you guys have about teaching the 2-point trot first? And yes, this can be done in a Western saddle. You do need to kind of adjust position a bit more. It's going to be a bit more upright because of that horn. You might want to have the student cover the horn with their hand, but not grip. Also watch, jackets and everything if you have a horn on there, just like you would if you were doing a posting trot in a Western saddle. But it can also be helpful for those that are in a Western saddle but are on a more bumpy horse. Because 2-point and posting are not just English things, they are riding skills in general, no matter what type of tack or equipment you are in. All right, let me scroll up, make sure I didn't listen. So Melanie said, I have 2 Western pleasure horses, so the jog is our first go-to, smooth, slow, controlled by the seat. Yeah, so that's another one, the controlled by the seat. So if you have really well-trained horses, this is something that I ran into as well. If you introduce that sitting trot first and your horses are very well trained to the seat and the weight aids, sometimes they will be resistant in going or get going too fast because they're feeling that newer rider learning that sit the trot, which all of our riders need to at some point. Totally get it. But sometimes going up into more of a 2-point position can take a little bit of that confusing seat aid out of the mix and allowing your rider to learn how to move on top of and with that horse that's under them. Then we float down into that sitting trot. So if you have a horse that's struggling with a student, introducing that sitting trot, just keep that in your back pocket. But it sounds like you're lucky with some smooth horses, and you probably struggle then if they're super smooth with having students learn how to post, because you might be missing a little bit of that oomph there. I've got one of those guys out there where he's super smooth and it's harder to post on him because he just doesn't quite give you enough bump. All right, guys, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for joining in. If you like this kind of content, make sure you check out the videos on Hoof Falls and Foot Falls Facebook page. I also try to cross-post them on YouTube so that you guys can watch them on there. Sometimes they're easier to find on YouTube than Facebook, so make sure you like and follow and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, if you want more quality education like this, not just from me, but other professionals in the equine assisted services field, especially adaptive and therapeutic riding, check out the Intuitive Instructor Club. It's a low-cost membership group, but the reason why there's a membership fee involved with it is because we have over 160 videos in there. It's like our own little online social media platform, and There's presentations with PowerPoints and videos of actual students. And so stuff that I just guard a little bit more because you know how social media and the internet can be. So it's videos of actual students. So we're careful about, I'm careful about putting them out there and not what I show on social media here. So Intuitive Instructor Club, check that out. But for the free stuff, follow Hoof Falls and Foot Falls on YouTube and Facebook page, and liking and following pages, not just mine, but any other people that you like. It's kind of silly, but like it's the, you know, the powers that be on all social media. That is something that you can do for other coaches and instructors and trainers you like, is like and follow their page and react to their posts and give comments, because that helps show social media and YouTube that you guys like this content, and then you keep seeing it and other instructors and other horse people keep seeing it. So do that not only for Hoof Falls and Foot Falls, but other channels and professionals that you guys like as well. So I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, or whatever time it is and wherever you guys are watching. If you're watching or listening on a replay, you guys can still post comments and questions. I'm sorry, you can post questions in the comments. Try to tag me though, so at Hoof Falls and Foot Falls, so that I see it, so I can try to answer your questions, and I will do my best to answer those questions on YouTube and Facebook and the podcast channels that we're on. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys on the next live instructor chat.